Currently, Elizabeth's the director of the Human-Computer Interaction eBay Research Labs, sorry, director of Human-Computer Interaction at eBay Research Labs, where she's starting a group focused on human-centered commerce, which is an interesting idea. Originally a psychologist, she focused on understanding people's social and collaborative interactions in their everyday digital and physical contexts. You may know her from a column she's written for quite some time for the Interactions from ACM, organization that Kai and Beikai are all related to. You have your most recent book, Elizabeth, is Foundations for Designing User-Centered Systems, currently Executive Vice President at ACM SIG Kai, so really I think you're the ranking Kai member in the room at the moment. Distinguishing Visiting Scholar at Stanford University EDX. Do we have to all evacuate now or something?
The phone's in his pocket.
It's fine. I know I'm safe to ramble up here because I know Steve cuts all of this out when he makes the podcast. So there's just like this stentorian voice saying the name of the speaker. Anyway, I could read her bio for the rest of the hour, and that's probably not a good idea. But if you're interested, Elizabeth's PhD is in cognitive science from the University of Cambridge in Cambridge, United Kingdom, which you may have heard of. And please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Churchill.
Thank you. Could you get me some water?
Yeah, please.
Thanks. Hi, thanks so much for having me here. Let me just get this up here. Ta-da. I'm hoping this is going to be kind of informal. So it's, it's an evening, you've all been at work. This is supposed to be about fun. And yeah, a bit more fun. There are 3 things that I'm going to try and just ramble around. And so if you're really bored, this is the end, okay? When it comes to multimedia, I really want to think about design. How do we do thoughtful design around effective multimodality, not just multimedia? And I'll try and explain what I mean by that. How do we understand and measure multimedia and multimodal experience? I suspect a number of you in the room are involved in designing things, and then people say, how do you know you've had an impact? And then you have to come up with measures and metrics and impact measures and all the rest of it. How do you actually instrument something so that you can reflect the experience that you've had on somebody, how you've had an impact on them? Thank you so much. And participating, I think that one of the interesting things is that we build things and we put them out there, and then we're always we know that the way people adopt things or experience them isn't exactly like the user scenario that we specified and motivated a design by. And we know that we're sort of participating with users, and never more so than in social multimedia. And how we really leverage the things that happen and the signals and the signs of how people are adopting things is a really interesting challenge. And especially as the world is going faster and faster, and new technologies are coming out all of the time, and new multimodal experiences. And you put a picture out there or a video out there, and then you get really surprised by the comments and by how it moves through social networks. So I think these are really interesting problems. And interesting problems for anyone who cares about designing technologies that people use, and anyone who's immersed in this wonderful world of multimedia that is emerging, that is, where the producers and consumers may be one and the same. So what is multimedia? There are a couple of vernacular definitions. I'm sure that people sort of think about movies and films and so forth. And I've been really sort of thinking about vision and sound, right? Vision and sound. That's very much multimedia. But technologists who have studied multimedia for a very long time, and the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, multimedia gurus of the last 10, 15 years, been very obsessed with the artifact of multimedia, the keyframes, the soundtracks. And how do you start to actually characterize the artifact by breaking the artifact down? This was actually some analysis that was done on a great multimedia experience from the 1970s. Some of you in this room might remember the movie Earthquake, which was the first sense-around multimedia experience, right? And Dolby sound had you shaking in your chairs. And it was supposed to be this really immersive experience. But what a lot of folks in the multimedia world kind of did with that was take the artifact itself and study the artifact. Now, what we do as social media analysts is not just look at the artifact, but start to look at what the artifact does to people. How does it move through a social network? Which pieces do people clip out and put up on YouTube? Which pieces do people take, remix, put new soundtracks to, expand? So to understand multimedia isn't to understand the artifact alone. It is to understand how it operates in the social context and in the social multimedia world. So a lot of, a psychologist, I would say, understanding multimedia is understanding what people do with it. It's a huge part of understanding the impact of multimedia. And indeed, Shifu Chang, who is the current president of ACM Multimedia, the special interest group on multimedia, last year on a Google Plus announcement when he took up the position, he said, well, what do we mean by multimedia? The conventional definition is handy but limited. The use of, still the use though, a variety of communication media, including text, audio, sound and music, and visual, image, video, and graphics. But in the age of big data, characterized by volume, velocity, and variety, multimedia represents the emphasis on large varieties of data types. Sensors capturing information in novel contexts of mobile, game, health, biomedical, environment, content, and people. So it really is focusing on the content and the people and saying that the multimedia world needs to pay attention to this. And of course, as a psychologist interested in human-computer interaction, I'm really pleased that the world of the sort of technologists who analyze the media artifacts are also thinking about the experience. It's really important. Because if we're going to actually instrument effectively and look at social networks effectively and look at consumption effectively, we need good measures to be able to do that. And of course, I'm really interested not just in consumption, but as I said a moment ago, the producers and consumers are often the same folks, and they are, the producers create things, get inspired by things, consume things, and we remix, and we are all part of this world. And so with that sort of preamble about what multimedia meant academically, what it meant in a vernacular sense, and where we're going as a research field, I want to say that the rest of this talk really, I have 3 hats. And I'm not gonna give you some kind of breakdown of, and here's the really important science bit, and here's the bit that's fun. I hope you'll just enjoy some of these things. I could have renamed this talk here a review of my favorite things. But really, all I'm gonna do is show you some stuff, some questions that are in my head, and I'm gonna ask you for help. And I'm gonna show you some of the things that are inspiring me to create the best sort of multimodal, multimedia experiences. And I'll give you some context for why I care. And I have 3 hats, and I don't promise to keep them separate. Art installation lover. I've been peripherally involved in a number of art installations and supporting friends and being a test driver and being an inspirer and actually building some myself. And I'll show you a couple of kind of old ones that I am just really, really, really fond of, one of which I was sort of helped out with. I am a psychologist. I care about the humans first. I care about understanding human experience. I dislike any measure or metric of human experience that reduces human experience completely and misses the point around human emotion and human real deep experience. And I am a technologist. I love to build things. So you'll see these 3 hats coming out. And with that, I'm going to show you a video. This is from 2005. It was shown at Isaiah in 2008. It's Narinda Readers and David McLeod. And it's called The Shy Picture. Has anyone seen this? I want you to, when you're watching this, I just want you to think about the artifact, the experience, and the fact that the producer and the consumer, the artifact and the consumer are sort of shaping each other's experience. Now, this was an installation that is in a gallery, and hopefully you'll get the point as you see it. oh, that's not what I want to do. I want to do that. And think about, how would you measure this person's experience as they're experiencing this?
Watch out! Watch out! What do you want? Where are you? Careful, careful. Get back. Now? Now? No, not yet. Careful. No, not too close.
I just think that's gorgeous. I get goosebumps every time I watch it. Because it's just, you're involved in creating this experience, and they're having an experience, and then you're cut off from it, and then you're invited back. And it's all proximity detectors, right? So as you get closer, you set it off, and they run away, right? And then you go back, and it's beautiful. Me? Yes. No, I'm totally involved. So, when we're talking about measuring immersive experience, I think that's a very immersive experience and somewhat different from a lot of the experiences that, I've been involved in developing on the web, for example. And there's this interesting world that we've gotten to where, we've got this incredible power, and yet it's so flat. So flat. And there's so much work, and you're the smart people in the room. We've got work to do, people. Right, so now I'm going to show you an installation done by some friends of mine and I was peripherally involved in. This was, again, a few years ago, and it's just another song that I like, so you're going to have to just listen, sorry. So what this was Tina Gonsalves and Tom Donaldson, and they were based at the Banff Media Art Institute at the time. What Tina did was she filmed herself. I had someone film her in all of these emotional states. And then she clipped together a bunch of these films, and she put it was a little screen, and it was hooked up to a galvanic skin response thing. So if I'm talking to you and you're stressing me out, you get to see me looking really stressed out. I don't. So your reaction, my reaction to you, is shown on my badge, on my jewelry. If I'm calm and I'm having a great time, it'll show me in a much more copacetic mood. So it's a weird, socially involved biofeedback loop. And it was just such a fun installation. So I just want to show you this. Here we go. Oh, no, I keep clicking the wrong thing. There we go.
Mes plaisirs, je n'ai plus besoin de balayer les amours avec leur trémolo, balayer pour toujours.
Testing, I was testing.
Je repars à zéro. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Car ma vie, car mes joies, aujourd'hui, ça commence avec toi.
So there you have it. Again, I think, we're not even at the beginning of that emotional understanding, responding, building a model of emotion, reflecting emotion, and then building and exchanging. So as a psychologist, I really care about this. But also, as a psychologist, when I think about multimodality and the multiple channels that we have at our disposal and how complicated it is to understand what people are experiencing, sort of these are the five senses, the bacchanalian, delights. This is Pietro Paolini in the 1600s. As a psychologist, and a technologist, I feel absolutely compelled to just break it down. To what are the different senses that are going on, and how do they, at the first slide I said, how do these senses, how can we measure them separately? What impact do they have? When is vision good? When is smell good? When is sight good? When is touch good? And how do they integrate? I don't think we even know what modality to present something in to be most effective half of the time. And how do they get integrated? So while that's not a very great picture, there's a more artistic rendition. And so what I'm going to do is just go through a few of the questions that have been top of mind for me if I really wanted to even get one step closer to really understanding how we can really extend the channels, the multimodality, the multimodal channels that we have. Sight. I think we're pretty good at sight. This is a great picture by my colleague Badrul. And how many people in this room do sort of eye tracking and so forth? Oh, good, a few of you at least. I mean, I think we have an idea that we understand what is, what people attend to, right? And we're pretty good at that. This is actually based on a model built by Vidya Navalpakam when I was at Yahoo and she worked with me. And this was not from actual eye tracking. This was building a model based on vision science. And what we were doing here, what Vidya was doing, was predicting what were the things that someone was most likely to see precognitively. So salience, basically contrast and saturation. If you build a model, and then we were looking at things like ads and saying, what is the most salient thing here? And then building a prediction around where people would look and then doing some empirical tests. But you know, it was kind of, what are people looking at? We're even just scratching the surface of understanding that. And you know, this is some work from 1967 from someone called Yarbus, which is one of the foundational papers to read. Because what they were looking at is in the real context, not when you're looking through eye tracking devices and so forth. If you show people a picture and you tell them to do a different thing, you give them a different task, their eyes track differently. Now, intuitive, right? But we don't really know how to understand that. Now, with all of the fantastic mobile eye trackers and stuff we've got going now, where you can actually video what someone sees and you can see where they're looking, I think we can start to think about people's tasks and their contexts and how that changes the way they scan a scene and what's salient and what they foveate on. But we're still at the beginning, so smart people in room, please help. Hearing, I think we're pretty good at sight, pretty good at sound, right? All of these pictures are taken either from friends or from Flickr, and I've put the credits there because some of these photographers are fantastic. And you know, I mentioned the favorite film from the 70s, Sensorama, earlier. But you know, Dolby really tried to create the sounds that would immerse you in something, make the experience better, so you've got vision and sound, right? Now, if I'm on the web and I'm trying to work out which set of speakers to buy for my room, I want a model. I want like an immersive simulation of what those speakers will sound like in my room, right? Because I can read all of these reviews forever, and people say the sound is warm and sonorous. And I'm like, really? Fantastic. What the hell does that mean? And how does it going to fit in my room, right? I just spent like days trying to buy headphones, and oh God, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Because what somebody likes and what they use it for and how they use the same words to describe very different things, and their benchmarks are very different. And of course, you know, in my current context, if I'm thinking about these speakers, either buying them or selling them, I mean, how do I want a simulation of these speakers, what they'll sound like in my room. Can't do that yet, can we? Or can we? Yes, you are. You're limited by the speakers on your computer. Yes, you are. But is there some other way? Remember, I'm trying to think about multimodality. Is there a way of representing sound waves, and I draw a picture of my room, and I represent the sound waves? Is there some other way to transmit this information, to get around that? Because the words ain't doing it, frankly. I remember when I first got, I downloaded Sketch. People use Sketch, where I could actually like lay out my room and start putting things around. That was like the best thing ever for me, so I got very excited by that. You can see what an exciting life I have. But can you imagine putting some sort of sound capability, sound waves or something in there? I don't know. I'm asking questions. I need help. Smell. Who in this room has seen Harold and Maude? Yay! All right, well, this is my favorite bit for this context.
I then became infatuated with these myodorifics. Give the nose a treat, I thought, have a kind of a olfactory banquet. So I began first on the easiest, roast beef, old books, mown grass, and Mexican farmyard. Oh, Here's one you like. Snowfall on 42nd Street. I'll put it on. Now, you hold out of this. I'll pump it up. Okay. Now, hold it up there. Okay. Now, what do you smell?
Subways? Perfume? Cigarettes?
You might all have to share.
Smell?
Oh, it goes on and on.
It's just great.
Actually, could you pass some of these back? Would somebody mind helping me? So I'm going to run an experiment in a second. And you might need to share, because I didn't have that many of them. But given this is multimodal, I figured we should have a bit of a sniff. All right? So this is a scratch and sniff. And in a second, what I might do, thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate that. This was a kind of dream, right? But you know, here is an art project just from a couple of years ago. A year ago, maybe? 2013, I think. Thank you.
Clicking in, clocking out, time my day in sunshine, cook a storm and watch it rain. Make a tie that is strong, I will hang here like a keychain, like the rope for the policeman.
And this is someone just sort of talking
British
about
student
it.
designer Amy Radcliffe has come up with a speculative scenario for a smell camera that turns photography into scentography. Basically, the idea is to capture the scent of a specific moment in time in a device with a resin trap that absorbs the particles. You then send that sample off, and you get back a perfume-like vial that you can keep and smell whenever you want to trigger that memory in your brain. Now, scent capture technology has already been in existence for quite some time. It's called headspace technology and is widely used by the perfume and flavoring industry. But the idea to merge that technology with the concept of a camera is new and is very amazing. Only it's too expensive and bulky and impractical right now. But keep in mind the development of the camera over the last 200 years. When it first was invented, you could only take one image at a time, stored on one plate to be developed later. It was big, bulky, and not at all practical by today's standards. But then we got film cameras that could store many images on a roll of film, and film processing centers that could develop the film much more rapidly. Now we can store thousands of photographs on tiny discs and view them instantly. Why can't smell technology develop the same way? Imagine if you had a device that could not only store photos and videos, but hundreds of smell recordings that you could sniff instantly or in a little smell printer in your house to create a much more immersive memory aid. And there's no reason to think people with a lot more resources than Amy Radcliffe, with a lot more scientific knowledge than me, won't try to develop it, considering how much money they could stand to gain and how much of a leap forward it would be in our ability to record our history. Imagine being able to spray the scent of a Civil War battlefield into the air if you're a teacher, or waking up and spraying the exact scent onto your bed of that morning when you camped next to a beautiful river or a beautiful woman? What would you use your scentograph for?
I'm sorry, I couldn't edit that bit out. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, people are thinking about doing this. Scent enable your experience, video games, and people are trying to work on this. And yet again, the 70s. The 70s had us with, who remembers polyester and the odorama? Woohoo! Alrighty. Oh, and by the way, you can buy the original card on eBay, just so you know. All right, everybody, get ready to scratch and sniff. And why do I care? Because I'm a little obsessed with Hermes scarves. I haven't pulled the trigger because they're too expensive. But I'm obsessed with these little descriptions of them. I spend days looking at this. Look, it says, there is a smell of a perfume. Now, this is a pretty good deal. It looks like it's really good. It's authentic. I know I went through all of the, like, how do you do it? Well, as authentic as I can tell. It looks really good. Okay, prepare to scratch and sniff. Because I want to know what that perfume is. I'm just trying to think about what this experience might be like if I could have smelt what that damn perfume was. All right, scratching and sniffing. Everyone scratching and sniffing. You guys have to try some scratching and sniffing, you two in the middle there. All right, who got a blue? What is blue? See, it's actually really hard, isn't it? It is theoretically popcorn. All right, everybody, what is orange? Who got orange? What is orange? Diesel. It gets worse. What is red? It's vanilla. Brown. Who got brown? What is brown? It's smelly feet. Would I have let you people down? All right, what's green? What's green? Green will tell you more about me than it will about the smell. Does anyone have an idea what green is? It's actually no scent, because I'm an experimental psychologist and I had to have a control condition. All right, anyway. But you see how hard it is, which is fantastically interesting. Remember, I'm here to challenge you. I need your help. All right, touch. Now, touch is really, really, really important. And we really know that because, you know cashmere when you touch it. You know that this fabric, whatever the fabric might be, is what you're going to put on your baby. And if you can't touch it, some things you just don't want to try, right? You know, unless you know the product already, you're buying a second one, you really want to touch it. And there's been some really amazing work being done on touch interfaces and haptics, so you get some sort of feedback. Again, bless you, we're very far from being there, but people are really working on this. Do I have no sound? Oh.
Materials. Beyond experience, tactile sensations also guide us in everyday tasks and help us to explore object properties that we normally are not able to see. Today's touch input technologies usually do not provide tactile feedback. Therefore, the user cannot take full advantage of their sense of touch. Tesla Touch is a new tactile technology that allows us to feel a broad range of tactile sensations on touch screens. Unlike other tactile technologies of today, Tesla Touch does not use any mechanical motion. Instead, the tactile sensations are generated by varying electric fields applied to a touch panel. The tactile panel consists of a glass plate covered by a transparent electrode and a thin insulation layer. A periodic electrical signal applied to the transport electrode displaces charges within the insulation layer, creating an oscillating electric field. When a finger is placed on the surface of the touch panel, a periodic motion of electrical charges is induced in the tip of the finger. This results in a periodic attraction force between the finger and the panel, modifying the friction between the sliding finger and the panel, and thus producing a sensation of tactile texture. Tesla Touch can be easily combined with different display and input technologies and used in many applications. For example, we can simulate the feeling of various textures, or we can enhance drawing applications with the feeling of paint on a virtual canvas. We can also simulate friction between objects. For example, dragging a virtual car would feel different depending on the type of virtual pavement, or dragging large files would create more friction than smaller ones. Similarly, we can make the user feel constraints, such as snapping to a grid in a manipulation task. There are many more applications of this emerging tactile technology. Combined with other input modalities such as video, we create many new and exciting applications and user experiences.
So I think that's pretty awesome, frankly. So, what about taste? And, you know, I should tell you, I'll go this way and then back. There's a lot of sweet treats on eBay, and I want to know what some of these might taste like. And there's like a huge nostalgia sort of pit for me, because I could go back and get old sweeties from when I was little and stuff. But I just want to show you this, which is some folks, Adrian Chuk and his students, when he was at KO, he's now in London. So this is back in 2012, and they started to just sort of play around with this idea of taste. They apparently are getting quite advanced in creating some of these. And I'm looking forward to it. Although, clearly it's a prototype. We need to do some work on the interface. All right, so having talked a little bit about multimodality from a psychologist's perspective and all of these different things that we can start pushing on, I want to just sort of step back a little bit and say that even if we knew how to measure, how to deeply understand, produce a sensation, and measure it in the lab, that somebody actually says, wow, I did really taste that. One of the things that we know is that things are framed. I mean, you can, we know about it cognitively speaking. If you frame something in a particular way, people have a different experience of it than if you frame it in another way. And one of the things that happens, as I mentioned earlier, as we all know, is that social media what's happening around the object frames how it's understood. And so I did a lot of work on Flickr when I was at Yahoo. And, you know, it's not just a simple platform. People come with multiple roles, multiple perspectives. And when you talk to them about their experience of the interface, or the service, or the product over time, it really is different depending on whether they're documenting something. Is it for a personal or collective memory? They would complain about different kinds of features and say this doesn't work and this does. If it was around competition, there was a huge furore about how, you know, the way in which images were being represented, and you don't give us a nice frame and it's not on a black background, and I want my images to look this way and I want to control this, that, and the other. Because people were really like, it was about status and competition. They wanted to show their stuff off. Whereas if you ask people who were interested in group membership, they didn't care about that. They really wanted more social features. They wanted more, you know, to be able to connect with people. And one person could complain and or praise the same thing depending on which role they were in at that moment. Learning and emulating, people were really interested in having more. Can you sort of like put more of the EXIF information, and can you explain what EXIF information really is and how I would do it on my camera? And awareness, you know, if people were using it simply to just, you know, feel close to their friends and so forth, they wanted timeliness of updates and notifications. And of course, vanity and voyeurism is my favorite, you know, because a lot of people just spend a lot of time on sites like Flickr just browsing on through. And what they want from the service is different. So their goal, remember I was talking about the eye tracking, where the goal actually changes the eye, you know, where the eyes move in a scene. Well, your expectations of a service change the way you highlight or don't certain features, and that's really hard, right? And then there's other people's activities. So this is from the Flickr Commons, which, are you all familiar with the Flickr Commons? The Commons was set up about, 10 years ago by a number of super smart people, including George Oates, who she went out and really partnered with a lot of museums, photography museums, and, you know, archives, like the Smithsonian and various other places, and got them to take the pictures that were hidden away and put them up on Flickr. And really, a couple of things happened. One was that these fantastic artifacts were revealed and available, but the other is that people started to write comments on what that was. You know, who is that person, and what is she doing, and why was she there? And people started, like, that's a relative of mine. And people would say, no, using this machine, not that. So the information was suddenly crowdsourced. And so the experience of this artifact starts to change because it starts to have this cultural weight, and it creates a conversation, which I think is really interesting because it changes the way you come to the site, Flickr, and it changes the way you come to the image, and it changes the way you understand the image. We all know this intuitively, but all those multimodal sensorial things, we have to understand how the whole experience is created. And we looked at it. This is from some work done with Ayman Sharma, again, when I was at Yahoo. And we really was looking at how the social effects, who's watching you and why, and who's following you, and what are the shares and the people, the comments, how do they make you feel about something that you come to new, or feel differently about something that you uploaded? So you uploaded a silly picture and suddenly it goes viral. What happens? Can we make any predictions about that? We're trying, but do we really understand that? So I still think there's a lot to be done in this space. So as somebody who's a service provider, you know, once you allow comments and once you allow activities, you're changing the nature of the thing that you're presenting that's on your site. So one of the other things that I worked on a lot was, at one point I got dubbed the Miss Manners of the web. I'm not quite sure what to do with that. But I was looking at anger, and I worked with Sarah Sood from Pomona College, and she and I used a bunch of sort of sentiment detection opinion mining techniques to look at a service which has now gone, but it was Yahoo Buzz. And it was supposed to be a sort of very lightweight news platform where people were putting comments up. And one of the interesting things there was that it really skewed heavily to nasty, nasty comments. And you know, we did an analysis of Yahoo Finance, which, you know, was just as open, but the comments were just much more constructive. And so we started to just look at, and my analogy at the time was it's like going to a bar, right? And you go to the like rockin' bar where everybody wants to go for a fight. And so people would come there for a fight. But what was happening was that it was amplifying. Because if I came because I wanted to read and suddenly everyone's fighting and being nasty, I self-select out. And people self-select in because they're like, oh yeah, I can rollick and have a fight. And so we did a lot of sort of analysis of, could you, for example, work out when a conversation was going to go south? So basically the first bad comment. And one of the things that we were prototyping was, if you put a nasty comment, you get to see the comment, but no one else sees it. So you think, whoa, my experience, whoa, I'm there. No one else sees it, and then you're like, no one's clicking on my responding. Gonna go away. So these are the kinds of social things that really change the way somebody experiences something. And so how do you design to make sure that, the people who don't want to see it don't see it? And in fact, Popular Science, not that long ago, last year, they shut off their comments because actually they were saying that the impression management basically was being managed by nasty people making nasty comments. And it was having a halo effect on their brand, but also on the stories. And they chose to just turn this off completely. And I just want to tell you a little bit about some work, again, on a Yahoo site property that shut down. This is Yahoo Live, which was a webcasting technology. And this had a lot of DJs came to it. And this woman, one of the things that she was doing, so she's going to DJ. These are folks who've got their webcams and they're at home listening to her doing a live show. Here are the people who are online or following her. Here are the comments. And in real time, you'll see that she's managing a bunch of stuff and trying to frame what she's doing. And in the end, she actually had to hire somebody to moderate the comments because she couldn't do that at the same time, but she was finding that was really changing the tenor of the experience of the folks in the room. And I just want to show you just like how much work she's doing here.
I'm a hustler, homie. I got the product, all products for the customer, homie. All right, next up, y'all, I'm gonna feature an artist from LA. This homie, so I only got a couple of homies. If you a hustler, he been grinding doing his thing. In a couple bucks, signed to So Death. Some of you may know who that is. I do a featured artist from the Bay too. Gotta keep the West Coast in here. And hot. That's hot, like Jamaican club.
So you get the general idea, but one of the things, and she keeps looking and making eye contact. One of the things was like, could I swap out who gets put in here and can I control that? Because it's creating an impression of who I am and who follows me. Now, another place this shows up a lot was I did a lot of interviews on dating sites, and there were a whole bunch of people who told me that they will link to really attractive people, because when I go to your profile, if you're surrounded by, you've never met these people, these are just images, but if you're surrounded by a lot of people who are really, really attractive and you've kind of liked each other, your credit goes up, interestingly. So what is around you really affects the impression people have of you, which it's intuitively obvious, but what's weird is that when you start to see it and you start to have people say, can I manage this a little bit more effectively? I only want gods and goddesses around me, please. Stop those people like trying to be my friend. I think I might like them in real life, but not on my dating profile. And so, stories and impression management is part of all of this. And the impression management affects the way that people experience what's going on. And this is a project that I love. This is called 100 Extraordinary Stories About Ordinary Things. It's called Significant Objects. And this is an experiment by a bunch of artists who basically they've got these items for little money, and then they told extraordinary stories about them. And then the items sold for more money. And all of the money that came in went back into the artist collective. But if you, there's a gorgeous book out, and some of the stories are just really interesting. But that's a framing. You know, if the visual framing, you have your dating site, you frame yourself, the visual framing of who's around you. But these are framings. And I think that we have to think very carefully about what someone brings to the table when they come to look for something or experience something, as well as what they experience when they get there. And all of these affect how people really react to the thing. And as we saw earlier, even with smell, you can tell a different story. And you can make somebody believe that smelly socks is actually not bad, strangely. All right, so I'm coming to an end. Or that version of smelly socks. So I said there were 3 things. I'm really fascinated by designing, and I said I've got like the 3 hats on: scientist, art lover, technologist, understanding. And we really have to measure differently. How do we really design for multimodality, given that this participation and interactive framing is occurring? And I just think we're in a really interesting world to think about that, and think about what we as service providers, technology designers do allow, don't allow, and what we can leverage that's being prototyped. And we really need to understand better. If we can't go and actually ask somebody and watch, how do we measure all of this effectively? I mean, I just think, you know, sort of bounce rates and click-throughs and, you know, view counts and so it's just like it's not quite there yet, really, is it? It's like being at a seance, as I once said. You've got all of these like traces that someone left. The way I put it well back was, you know, basically you've got all these traces of what somebody did, so the dearly departed have left, and you're kind of like going through all of their traces to see how you can get them back. So it's like being at a seance, really, isn't it? It's like, why did they like that? Why didn't they? Is that engagement? I don't know. So I want us all to think about it. And, you know, if you've got attention, that it was noticed, like the eye gaze stuff, we've got some stuff which is around behavior that we're doing quite well, I think, that it was interacted with or not, and how long and by whom. We're really not terribly good at this. We do surveys and we do retrospectives, and we try to measure that, but it's kind of hard. We need to kind of work on that. Impact, we have some kind of big models of impact, that something really had an impact, but often that takes more time to really understand. And meaning, I mean, what it meant and what it will mean, I think, is really interesting. Especially like the Flickr example is the cultural meaning of an artifact many years later cannot necessarily be predicted. But it really, you know it when it's happening, right? You really know it's there. And, you know, I'm not saying we have to measure this, but I think we have to be aware of something having longevity or not, and why it might. And the complexity really increases as you start to really try to engage with what are the right sort of things you're producing along these scales. And I'm just sort of playing around with this, so please give me your feedback and your thoughts. But, you know, how do we actually, HCI, historically, you know, was about the interaction at the interface, and about tasks, and about efficiency. And then it's sort of, you know, in the second wave, it sort of became around collaboration and cooperation and co-production. The third wave is now sort of really around, you know, including emotion. And we're also starting to look at really societal level impacts. So if you think about the time scales, where really we've always played around with the time scales, but we're really trying to think about how we really have impact. And I think at the center of HCI and of a lot of multimedia designers, an ethical question about how we engage with the short, medium, and long term. And I'm trying to think about how the measures and metrics that do exist, that we currently use, and the methods that we use, really honor that ethical engagement and the longer term as well. So I'm just sort of playing. So that's leaving you with a heavy philosophical question, having hopefully entertained you with some of the fabulous technologies that are coming out. And if you have thoughts and ideas, please email me. I'd love to be in dialogue with you about, you know, building fabulous things, but having meaningful impact and really representing the human experience, the person, in what we design and develop. And with that, kisses to you all. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good. So when we make meaning, we have a physiological response to that meaning-making experience, and I'm wondering if, as the complexity grows and you're trying to get at the heart of these meaningful experiences, are you aware of some biometric data collection to measure the physiological response to that meaning-making effort, and is there any correlation that's going on there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think the biometric work has really improved a lot. And I think the biofeedback work around the biometric work, so the sensors are getting better. The moderation and modulation of feedback in different formats is getting better. And I think we still don't fully understand, how to apply it. I was told about some really great work with kids who have autism around, anger and emotion management, and I think some really interesting work being done there, for example. But I think it's a really important question, and I think that's what Shifu was trying to get at with the sensors work. And part of this is that we have to, I believe that we who are humanists have to get involved in that conversation around what gets modulated and what doesn't, and in what the trajectories are. And so here's an example, sort of rambling, as I am wont to do. But a lot of the biometric work tends to work on a single person. And what we actually know is that social contexts plus the individual contexts tend to work really nicely. And so when I'm talking about the kids who suffer from autism, it's not that these are going to, be the only thing, but they often work in concert with caretakers very much more effectively. And so maybe one of the things we want to do is sort of think about not biometrics just on the individual, but the biometric in a social context, and in a physiological reaction context, but a cognitive and social cognitive context. I would love to see more work on that. Oh yeah, hey, how are you?
Question about
About meaning?
Okay. I've been thinking a lot lately about the narrative construction as a way of arriving at meaning or describing meaning. And I'm wondering, have you been exploring that? I mean, the stories that people tell themselves about what's going on, how can that be elicited and used, in this way of, basically ascribing metrics or deriving metrics from something like that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and actually having interfaces that are kind of more responsive and reactive is really important. So if you think about being in a conversation, there's a sort of really interesting effect that you've got a story going on in your head, and I've got a story going on in my head. And what we do is kind of meaning co-construction and sense-making through conversation. And I'd love to see more of our interfaces actually be a little smarter about that conversational exchange, which requires listening. It requires and I think some of the predictive models are a little bit around, for example, like frustration. If you are doing these behaviors, like slamming your keyboard, let me assume that something isn't, you have a different framing from what's going on than from what I do as a system. And I think those kinds of being more observant and more conversational, where the listening is better, I think is really important. I think we're at not even at the beginning of that. I think a lot of what we do with adaptive interfaces and, adaptive interactions is really simplistic models based on aggregates of what everybody might do, not models of you. And one of the things I've been writing about a lot is, putting the person back into personalization, and that requires having a conversation. And so I don't know how we solve that, and that's why it's a really interesting technological problem. But if you don't start from the point of view that this needs to happen, then we're not going to build to do it. Don't start from, to your point, what is your story? Can I help reframe that story? Or can I just tell you that actually I can't satisfy that story? However, here's what I can do. I mean, that's what a concierge does with you, right? Is that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been looking at people describing, what goes on in their day, or what's a bad day, right? What goes on in a bad day to identify needs or problems or something like that. And it's a way of getting at kind of indirectly, rather than say, what problems do you have? Or like that. Just find some way in a very natural way to get people to talk.
Right.
And also to learn how to listen, you say.
And I think that's key. So there was a service that I signed up for a while back. I think all you have to do is it asks you at the same time every day, or more frequent if you want, how was today? And you can set your questions. And it was like, how was today? How many calories did you eat? How do you grow? And I think this is like a supremely great idea, except it's just like this really annoying notification. And I'm like, I don't like you very much. I mean, it's like, why would I tell you anything? I don't really like you. I don't like the way you handle notifying me. You're kind of irritating me. I set the questions up, but like, it's so poorly delivered that I'm like, wait a minute, this is just really not very exciting. I'm boring myself,
Well, what you were just saying, though, it sort of assumes that people want their responses to be personalized. I mean, I'm thinking sort of in terms of, say, a Google search or something like that, where, one person searching on some terms might get completely different results from another person because, well, they have their search history, and Google thinks that they want to see these results instead, or they think that you will click through to some advertisements and buy something because of those links or whatever. So it's, I mean, you put it from an angle of, that I want to tailor the experience, and it's just there's just very poor tools to tailor it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are other experiences where they just deliberately do not give you the control to tailor it at all.
Right. And that to me is a little like, here's what goes on in my head when I see that is like, here I am behind this wall and I've got an image of you and I've got a bunch of stuff and I'm lobbing it over and going, oh, didn't want that? Well, what about this then? And what we want is, to your point, more of a conversation and more of a let me tailor this. Because one of the things I worked on with a bunch of people at Yahoo was what we called, or I named it because the psychologist in me, they came up with a much snazzier name, which I have of course forgotten. But it was archetypal search, where the idea was that, I kind of can select. It came, does anyone know the hipster handbook? The hipster handbook had all of these caricatures of hipsters. And basically this was a caricature thing, sort of like, I want to do a search and get search results as if I was a 17-year-old boy in the UK, which was my nephew at the time, right? Because I want to buy him something, and I'm like, what does that dude want? What have you personalized for him? Like, just show me his little caricature so I can get some ideas, Because, that would be, I was talking about the vanity and voyeurism on Flickr. I mean, this is like, it would also just be like a super fun game. Let me search and get the results you would get on this. I'm just curious about the other humans, and I just think that's a sort of fun, playful idea, but I don't see anyone doing that. And if there is any service out there like that, please let me know, because I want it now.
I can give one example, which is, for example, like Google News. If you can give Google News with different country codes in them, and you can say, what does it think is relevant to English speakers in France or English speakers in New Zealand? Or
that's true. That's very true. Yeah, now I just needed to do it for my shopping. I want to be a hipster. What would I buy?
So one of the things that I'm curious about, a lot of this was about what senses can you add in, and one of the things I'm curious about is what do you get when you take some senses out?
Yeah.
So like if you're talking about the difference between engagement while reading versus engagement while watching video,
right.
It turns out people get a whole lot more passive when they were watching video.
Right. No, I think that's a brilliant question. I think it's a brilliant question. I think if we even started to understand how to sort of simplify, it would be fantastic. Does everyone know who Ira Glass is? Yeah. He did this wonderful thing where he'd been on TV and done a show, and then I only ever listened to him on the radio, never saw the TV thing. And he has this gorgeous moment where he talks about the radio being much more intimate. And it's to your point. And you hear his voice on the radio, and you just feel like it's just you and him. And you're just listening to him. And I think that's to your point. It's so much richer an experience. And he talked about the production process being really hard, but then the intimacy with the audience and the audience's experience of intimacy went down. And so I think your point is absolutely brilliant, and we need to ask that question a lot more.
Hi. So I'm really interested in various different perspectives on human-machine relationships, and
Have you seen Her?
Huh?
Have you seen
I
Her?
have. Yeah. Don't get me started. Just kidding.
I think we maybe should.
Yeah. But starting as kind of an artificial intelligence person and then going into human factors and all that kind of stuff, I had a lot of questions that I was really interested in, but I didn't see a lot of other people interested in about, to what extent, does the person, really think of the machine as something, that is kind of human in some sense. I mean, you noted, for example, that a lot of these notifications are really annoying, and I agree. But, because to some extent, people wouldn't do that necessarily, right? And if they did, we don't really like them.
Yeah.
But in the sense of the multimodal stuff that you talked about, to what extent, can we really, in some sense, trick the user? And I mean, should we? I guess is another question. But because people, in a lot of ways, don't necessarily think of when they're browsing the internet or whatever, that they are really immersively in a real situation.
Yeah.
So there's a real and fake divide, and it's not necessarily human that they're interacting with, it's a machine, they're interacting through a machine or with the machine. So I was kind of curious on your thoughts on those issues.
There's a lot there. So there's a huge amount
Just the general relationship stuff, I apologize.
Well, firstly, I mean, you're right, people animate in some sense and project into machines of all kinds. And Cliff Nass, of course, was one of the first people to really write about this. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but his early work on the media equation was really trying to get at that from a social psychological perspective. So, there are different perspectives, as you know, but his really tried to look at it from when does this happen and how does it happen and what are the expectations and what happens when there's a fracture. So I think there is some really interesting work. But I think, again, where, people move in and out of, that, assuming that this is a real kind of intelligent agent that's responding to them. And I think I like to look at when I'm talking to somebody and I feel like they're being kind of robotic back at me, and I wonder, how do I, to come back to your conversation, how do I unpack what's going on for them? And I think what's interesting with computers for me is like, oh, well, I'm doing it as a dialogic thing right now, conversational, and actually what I really need to do is, go into programmer mode and, change you or, dump you as a service and get the upgrade or whatever. And so, I like to think about it a little the other way, which is, when do we start treating humans like that? When do we start, where are those fractures? Where do they occur? Where are those breaches, and how do you manage those? And maybe that's a good way to start thinking about sort of designing for these conversations, is to start to really think about how we manage those breaches with other people. So if I'm doing sense making with you, what is it that you do back at me that helps me make sense of you? So I think there's a lot of work in there. I'm rambling because I don't have an answer, but I think it's a really interesting area. But I would go back to that media equation book, actually, because they were really trying to think about interactive agents that were embodied and use gesture and other kinds of ways. What are the things that make it seem more compelling, and what happens when there's a real fracture, when you suddenly realize, oh, you are in fact just a bot. And there's also a lot of work on how people felt when they were interacting with bots in kind of virtual worlds, like the text-based virtual world characters, yeah? Then you suddenly work out that, you're actually in love with an algorithm. And you're like, and I think you just have to forgive yourself when you're in love with an algorithm.
But this is also referring back to even earlier work like Eliza.
Exactly
right?
so.
Right, and then Sherry
Exactly so.
Turkle's stuff too.
Yes, exactly so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, two questions, unrelated. One is, I see a trend on social networking, people just sharing things they like on Tumblr, on Facebook, on Pinterest. What are any research in that? I mean, I see that it may be a gold mine for like advertisers, so that they know what you like, but is this a good thing or would just entertainment?
Oh gosh, I mean, that's a huge question. I think that's a, how long is a piece of string question. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. I think, people have different personal tolerances for how much they want to share. People have different tolerances for how much they want to see. So the Flickr studies that I did, it was interesting. I looked at access control privileges and whether people shared stuff publicly or privately. And at that time, everything was definitely public by default. And it turned out that in America, people uploaded their pictures and left most of them public. And in Scandinavia, it came out as a lot of it was kept private. And so I followed up with some ethnographic style interviews and surveys, which is why the triangulation of methods always matters, right? Because I couldn't tell anything from this fact. And it turns out that the folks in Scandinavia most often articulated not just an awareness of privacy issues that was differently oriented than the folks in America. Oh, the one place in America where everyone was keeping everything private was Utah, just so you know. But they also articulated something that I had not expected, which I thought was super interesting, which was why would I impose all of this stuff on my friends? I want to curate so as to not waste my friends' time. Whereas the articulation here was very much, well, if you look, it's your problem, not my problem. I mean, I'm being sort of rude, but I mean, that was the characterization.
Well, actually, I was talking about something more Pinterest, like, oh, I like this design, I like this product, I like this saying, this quote. It's like, it's entertaining, but,
I think what I'm trying to say is that there are cultural differences as well as personal differences in what constitutes entertaining and how you use a social media platform. And so your question of, is it good or bad? I would say, well, it depends.
Okay.
And it depends on who you are and what you're trying to get from it. Now, do I think that, some people make themselves, render themselves more vulnerable because they're doing it? Yeah. Do I think that we should make sure that people are aware of the dangers as well as the positive things? Yeah. Do I believe that people should have access to their own data about them that's being compiled? Yeah, I believe that. And I also believe that, as HCI people, we need to be involved in a conversation which is around how do we help people curate their data effectively, because it's a really hard interaction interface problem. There's a bunch of folks in the UK that I'm on the advisory board with trying to set something up called human data interaction, which is how do we start to make the data about sharing and vulnerabilities around sharing more visible to people so that you can actually really understand how to curate
it's kind of hard to
yourself.
set permissions on Facebook.
Absolutely so, and I think this is an interesting question because, you need to be sort of, if you are worried, you need to be tech savvy or abstain, and those aren't the only choices. We need to do some research on this.
And the second question is, you mentioned all the 5 senses. I'm thinking, has there been any study on synesthesia where your senses are crossed?
Yes, there's quite a lot of work on that, actually, that's really super fun. I have no idea what to do with it.
Okay.
But it's super interesting. And if you're interested, I could point you to some things.
Hi, my name's Bill. I had a question about the last thing that you mentioned as part of your talk was that as HCI professionals, we need to have ethical engagement. And I'm not going to call out the ethics police here. I just had a kind of an academic puzzler for you. So some of the senses, when you participate in them, really become part of you, like smelling something or tasting something.
Yeah.
And I wonder, to what degree do you see it as the responsibility of HCI professionals to be ethical, not only about, these sort of futuristic-y things, but also the present-day things that you're seeing and touching and hearing that also become part of you in some way. What challenges do you see there? I'm not just talking about legally, but as far as giving a user some context to make judgments about the stuff they're about to take in.
I think I think it's really interesting. I don't really have an answer for you. I mean, I think that everyone has to make their own particular ethical stance on things. But, I'm all for, warnings, and I'm all for social, engagement around topics. Is this a reasonable topic for someone to see or not? I mean, I think, children is an obvious one, right? And we are better at that than we were, about putting safeguards in place. But I don't really have an answer for you except to say that I think I would like to see more discussions around the ethics of what we design and how we design it and who for, and how we really make interface and interaction decisions. And not warn people, but put content in context. I would like to see better design around some of that. And there's a whole bunch of people who've done some really nice work around, how people are represented and represented to themselves, and like Batya Friedman and others have done some nice work. Pretty early on at Chi, she was writing some very nice stuff. I'm saying pretty early on, but in terms of for when I started going to Chi. So I would look at what Batya's been writing about and who cites Batya, and then there's Helen Nissenbaum. She's been writing about privacy and ethics around privacy. And I'm trying to think who else. There's a couple of other folks who really are trying to engage with this. And folks like Dana Boyd, she's been really, and Kate Crawford, been really sort of bringing, Kate in particular actually has been doing a lot of writing and talking around data and ethics, and the ways that we even tell the stories around data and around this sort of utopian, oh, Twitter is changing the world. And actually, and overreaching some of the marks of what these great technologies that I love using are doing, but how are they constructed in the way we even converse about them? And so there's a bunch of folks who are working at that level, but I would like to see more of that as a clear discussion that's on the table during design in HCI. Yeah.
Just a comment, really. I personally am getting a little tired of the web. I feel it's trying to either trick me or second guess me.
Right.
And I guess what I'm wondering is there any work going on to try to inject some honesty back into the equation?
I hope so. I hope so. And I think this comes back to this question about we need to actually have ethical engagement with the stories we even tell. And I think, there are people out there who are trying to be transparent, trying to be clear and honest about what's happening with data, with interactions. But I think your sentiment is shared by a lot of people. And I actually think that the people who are in this room, who actually, in some senses, are sort of in the conversations around how services are shaped and how data is used and how people are constructed in the building, if you want the idealized model of who the user is, we're in the conversations. And I think we have to represent our users better and be clearer around, boundaries for them. And I don't know how to do that, but I think that we each individually have to try and work on that.
But just to some extent, there's so much analytics going into tracking my eyes and my movements and watching every little, like I'm in some cage, when if I could just talk to it directly and have it listen.
Right.
Like a very concrete example that happens right now is I'm on my, try to go to my Yahoo Mail, and every time now it decides that I need to upgrade my browser, of which it turns out I can't do for whatever reason. And then it insists on driving me through the same menus again and again and again. And it's really gone to a point where it's broken trust. And I just feel like it's not a person-to-person thing. I really want this emotional interface with the thing that you're battling, the thing that has put you in the cage.
Yeah, you want your time, your cognition, your energy and emotion respected, right? I think you bring up a really important question that, again, back to the ethics question. I think we have to make this explicit and not just say it's going to be okay, because it's not going to be okay unless we all sit and ask ourselves the questions around what are the boundaries, what are the experiences that we want to be endorsing and building and standing up for. And I think there's bad design, and there's bad service design, and then there's untrustworthy design, or disrespectful design. And deceptive, thank you, yeah. And I think that, oh God, there's a great website, which is called is it Deceptive Design, the guy in the UK, no?
Chris Notter has a book out and a website called Evil by Design,
That's
I
it.
think,
Yes.
.info.
Yes.
And he takes the 7 deadly sins and portrays examples from interface design according to evil, sloth, envy, et cetera, pride. Very clever treatment, and I think you'll recognize a lot of stuff. I'll give an example that I've found in the last couple weeks, and I have posted several places, and I'm waiting for the service to catch up with me. I see dead people when I sign into LinkedIn, and they are inviting, LinkedIn has scraped something or other and is inviting me to connect with people who I know are dead for 4 years or more, who are not members of LinkedIn. They want, say it again?
We had seances earlier. Why not?
Yeah, well, they've pivoted. They've gone beyond this realm, right? So, I mean, I've tweeted, please don't show me dead people. I've put it on my status, and I've entered it into a community on LinkedIn. I'm hoping maybe there's a LinkedIn designer here who will take this back to the engineering team and say, people are not happy to be invited to be asked to invite their dead friends to join LinkedIn.
Yeah,
But I think that's a beautiful
there's
example.
some good work.
It's a beautiful example because it's using humor, it's serious, it's important, it matters, and we have to engage in these kinds of conversations, and humor helps, especially when it's so absurd. I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
If you're interested in that issue of digital death, then Kalia Hamlin is the person who was driving a lot of that a year or so ago and did a lot of writing about it at the time, so you could look her up.
But I do think we need to have these conversations. I think what you're asking is really, really important, and we have to ask ourselves whether we are aligned, ethically, morally, emotionally, and just ask each other the question, where could this logically go? I think we should sit and have dystopia evenings with a glass of wine. It's like, let's all stop being super happy and let's be British.
Oh. But here's a mic.
You mentioned Bartia Friedman, and I wondered what your thoughts were of value-sensitive design,
Right.
talking about ethics.
Yes, and in fact, I did a workshop a few years ago at CHI on value-sensitive design, and what was particularly interesting in the discussion was we were all unclear about what we meant exactly by values, but we also backed into how do you talk about this very, very effectively without being like patronizing and speaking for others. Because, as I'm going around talking about what my ethics are, which is why I'm sort of like hedging a little bit, we need to get what other people's values are. And so some people want to share everything all of the time. I don't want to shut them down. I might want to warn them about what that means, and then they might say, well, you're being patronizing. I say, well, that's fine. I just wanted to let you know. And for some people, they actually really want someone to advocate on their behalf. And I think what we have to be really careful around is whose values and for what. And what are the short, medium, and long-term things? It's like, saying to somebody, getting hammered and dancing all night ain't good for you. That's what my trainer says to me. And I'm like, really? Oh, well. But she doesn't stop me doing it. Do you know what I mean? So I think we have to be really, really careful. But I think it's important that we raise it. Because if we don't even raise it, what we're doing is we have tacit assumptions around the values of the people we design for. And we design for personas or whatever that have embedded all kinds of values that we've projected. But we haven't critically interrogated what those are. And I think we have to just have that conversation. And we have to make space for that conversation. Because the trouble is when you're running to deadlines and expediting something and trying to design for this mythical average user, it often that gets left on the table because we think we don't have time. But I actually think it has to be front and center. Because if we're really building a relationship with our customers and our users for the long term, and that's why I was bringing up the complexity of the long-term value, the long-term meaning, and the customer lifetime value, or whatever you want to call it, we really have to put some flesh on those bones and step up to it. Gosh, I'm on a soapbox.
Dr. Churchill, this side of the room here. For some reason, your talk has me thinking about television. And in this way, the two senses that are involved in television, visual and hearing, are big, generous, high bandwidth, and very high resolution and precision. So they're rich. And when those were married together, it was, of course, a gold mine. I mean, a whole
Yeah.
huge multi-billion-dollar way of humans to interact, or industry, but it also makes you, the result of it is voyeurism. There's no feedback.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to just watch and listen, observe, and be the passive watcher. And if it doesn't continue to interest you, also about those two senses, they're not directly tied necessarily to satisfying a biological need like taste or touch or smell.
Yeah.
They're big and generous in terms of like they give vent or room for curiosity, exploration, amusement. The others to some degree, but they're more clunky, I think, if I could use a term like that. They're more, you get the extremes. You could get pain. You could get maybe, stroking a cat, but all the in-between stuff, it's just not as fine.
Right.
And if you do give people a way to feed back to their TV, to talk back to their TV, if they're not constantly amused as voyeurs, they will want to throw spitballs at it. Then I think you get the nasty comments. So
I don't agree, and I think that's what the internet did to TV. I mean, that's why all the advertisers are all freaking out, right? It's because we were all like, we don't want to watch your ads. And one of the really interesting things that happened, like at the Super Bowl, or various companies, including sort of YouTube and stuff, Google with YouTube, they're actually upping the quality of the ads, and they're giving you that skip option. And the thing is that if the ads are good, people like to watch them. But in the TV example, I think that advertisers got away with just having incredibly poor quality because you were trapped and stuck. And what happened with the internet was that people voted with their feet. And now the quality of ads is improving, especially the video ads, and people are trying to engage you. And half of the things that get sent around in social media these days are ads. It's like some of the ads are they're hilarious, they're brilliant, I want to share them, I want to see them. And they become content, they are content. And so I think that's sort of what happened and is what is happening. I do think your point about, what we understand about how people smell and the human variations is enormous. I'm very nosmic, because I like to call it, I have a really strong sense of smell. And sometimes I wish I didn't. People vary enormously in terms of how much they can taste, the super tasters and so forth. And so I think being aware of those things is important, but people do vary enormously.
what I was thinking is, do I explore the sense of smell? Like, do I wonder what vanilla mixed with Dijon mustard or burning rubber would smell like? I don't. It's just not that amusing. You do, okay.
I have a fridge full of perfume. I do. Why do you think I bought scratch and sniff stickers? I'm obsessed with it.
So, I'm way back here. Just as an aside, I was curious to know, maybe maybe if it's not as though those other senses are clunky, they're very useful in just a very different context. So yeah, high bandwidth is if you need high bandwidth, then use that channel. But if you don't, maybe it's cheaper and more efficient to use, your sense of smell. And if I'm not crazy, wasn't the MIT Media Lab for like a while, like back in the 90s, doing like ambient computing? Maybe they still have an ambient computing lab. I don't know. Maybe.
They've been looking at ambient computing a lot. And there was, I think, Joe Fish-Kay, when he was there with a couple of his colleagues, were exploring, sensoromas, smelloramas. So there's a bunch of stuff in the Media Lab where they've been trying to play with this and trying to sort of push on it.
So my question is then, are we seeing the kind of beginning of the war against the screen?
I hope so.
Because I'm really sick of screens.
Me
And
too.
there was a guy a couple months here who was like, everything's a screen now. And it was just like heartbreaking. And it feels like, none of the things, and there are other examples like what you've shown, none of them are actually even like web-based, which is really interesting.
I think a lot of, I'm just going to, a lot of what we were doing like back in the 90s, I'm old enough, before we all started like looking at a screen and before everybody became web, was super interesting. And I think that's why, I'm so excited about, Arduinos and Raspberry Pis. Let's get out there. Let's start actually, working with the world again and the physical body. There was a whole bunch of slides I had which were, just about how the body is sort of, we're not designing effectively to work with the body and in immersive experiences, and the web has sort of trapped us and become this dominant thing because it's information, information, information. And I think the business models completely stultified, design, frankly. And God knows I love the web. I love the web. But yeah, I'm just really excited about information being distributed in time and space and coming through multimodal, experiences. And when you think about some of the stuff that's happening with cars, the dashboards, and really having to think back to some of that human factors, ergonomics, information distribution in time and space, and really coming back to what the HCI folks in safety critical systems have never been allowed to forget, which is actually you need to understand the right information at the right time, and you need to have fail-safes, and you need to distribute information, in physical space quite often as well. I think we need to come back to some of that, and I hope we're getting ready. Not everything is a visual screen. It should be considered, I was talking to one the other day, think of it as a staging platform. It's just one of the many stages and one of the many representational formats that you can have information. And how do we make that effective for people? So I'm totally with you. Hey, sorry.
I'd like to go back to the idea of the maybe the contract between the individual and the big out there in the databases and friends and so forth.
Yeah.
And we at this point as humans are not even necessarily good at judging what we should share with another human in person without any other monitors around. And now we're trying to decide what we ought to share with a very persistent database, which has good memory, and what's out there. Even the most technological of us are probably bad at setting what levels of filters that we think we have on our stuff. Most people are nowhere near good enough to do that. The defaults is what, I'm sure you found that when you were looking at your stuff at Yahoo. Everybody's just using the defaults as far as permissions. In the world of like the television you're talking about, at that point there was sort of a standard out there as far as the interface. Television, everybody saw the same TV, everybody saw the same 3 channels, so you all had the same context, same frame. Now not only do we not all have the same frame, each frame changes daily. I mean, so where is the ethical approach to how you deal with this interaction here?
I know, there's the filter bubble problem in general, and then there's the personal issue, in general. I don't know. I think it's evolving, and I think it has to evolve within your social groups and for you personally. And I think your thing about persistence is really, really important, because it used to be that I could, say something asinine and be forgiven, and it was in a particular context, and you understood the context, and it was asinine, and I said sorry, and then we're done. And now it's out there, and the context isn't there. And I think a lot of people are trying to understand, how do you put things back in context? How do you understand that something was said with a particular inflection? I mean, I'm British, so I'm very sarcastic often, but if you write it, it doesn't come out, right? If you don't understand that I'm trying to be jokey and it falls flat, I think it's very hard. And I think that those are silly, trivial examples. But to your point, there are huge issues to be resolved for the future.
The other issue, I have 2 more issues that are related, and the other issue is people put up these permissions that they think that they're keeping various groups. Well, I'm not going to let my parents see what I'm doing. And we all know pretty clearly that that wall can all come down real fast.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of people who are behind the other side of the wall, either in our best interest or not, that can see it. So that's sort of a fig leaf.
Absolutely.
As to things. But how many people actually understand that it's a fig leaf?
I think people are becoming more aware. People are becoming increasingly aware that things leak from one context to the next, to the other, and with great speed, and that they don't have the control over those boundaries anymore. And, I've talked to a lot of people who, won't write anything in email because they say, just assume anything that you write is public.
That's exactly how I react. I share a lot. I have everything open, but I assume it's going to be, anybody's going to see it at any time.
Speaking of that.
Just saying, it brings me up to the last part that's scariest. I had somebody.
Are you going to leave me scared?
Yeah.
I'm going to need somebody to talk about.
Well, no.
I need unicorns and puppies. Otherwise, I'm going to be unhappy.
The scary part of it is the point is, there's one thing that everybody knows everything I did,
sure,
in or out of context. But then there's the next level is, let somebody say somebody has it in for me.
Yeah.
Then they go put things out under my name,
right,
that I didn't say.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's the how quick it spreads and how broad it goes and how people interpret it. That's a real problem. So I knew somebody many, many, many years ago who was dating somebody, and a woman was jealous and she wanted the boyfriend. And so what she did was she printed cards and stuck them all around telephone boxes with this girl's phone number on, with services, suggested. And this poor woman, who's innocent, who'd done nothing, was just traumatized by this and had to change her phone number. Now, I think that people have been being mean like that forever. But the problem now is it's persistent. It can be dredged back up, and the scale is massive. More than one person can cope. I mean, it was hard for her to cope because it's like all around town, right? But with a bunch of us all going around every phone box, I think we got them. And they kind of decayed over time, and the phone boxes were cleaned.
It's that decaying over time. I think you hear people talking nowadays about, won't the internet ever forget anything they did? Can I make that go away? Maybe right. Snapchat or whatever, things that are designed to be ephemeral and not added to your permanent record. Right. But then there's breaches of those things. And in fact, the thing I was going to, besides, I'm supposed to cheer you up. So 3 unicorns walk into a bar. No, I don't have a joke, but the, that was the joke, I guess. But no,
I'm going to find out the rest later. I have to.
I was going to actually ask you about something that's a little bit of a tech startup phenomenon of the moment, which is this app Secret. I don't know if you've seen it or played with it at all.
No, I haven't.
It's basically kind of like an anonymous Twitter. You join, it looks at your address book, and then people post anonymously. It's supposed to be a place to speak freely about things you might not say to other people. Sure. A lot of it's gossip, SF tech gossip, stuff like that. At least that shows in my network, I guess. But the a lot of people fret online, in the app saying, I don't know, who's going to buy this app someday? And
everybody.
Right. And meaning like, sure, what if I say my secret and it turns out later on it's breached and someone hacks in or whatever, and the wall comes down, as someone said on the other side of the room. And I think on the one hand, they're trying to create a space of intimacy and privacy to see if certain kinds of conversations will happen. In the other space, there's a lot of doubt and concern about trusting it as truly a safe environment for that kind of thing.
Sure, and like Path tried to be a little bit more like that as well. Now, are people identified in this?
No, it's absolutely anonymous. Sometimes people try to guess. They're like, who in my network could have said that? But it's kind of a friends of friends thing, so it's slightly obscure.
I think there's, I kind of like that. There's, now I might get the name of this service wrong. I think it's called Weeby Moms, something like that. A journalist wrote about this a couple of years ago, and she talked to a bunch of people, and it's for mums, essentially, but for parents. And the service, I might be misremembering the details, but there was a service, and it was described as basically 4chan for mums. It was where you could go and just be like brutal and like, I'm so sick of my children. Things that you're not allowed to say that are, not okay, and you can just say like really, really terrible things, and you're just venting, right? And when the service got bought, they wanted everyone to have an identifier. And everyone was just like, no, don't you understand? There are some spaces that have to be safe spaces. I absolutely don't want my ravings and rantings to come back to me. And I think the ways in which we hold people accountable for things before really understanding the ways in which they've been exchanging, we have to start looking at that. And it used to be, I remember the days of the internet where, I could be a butterfly, And now everybody wants me to be me. And that's a bit tedious because their model
Real
is
name.
horribly integrated notion of me, which I don't like very much. But I think there's really some great work to be done in that space. Back to the questions of ethics and so forth that we've been raising around how do we protect people? Given that we can't assume that the systems are going to protect us, I mean, how do we design in for protection? I think it's a really important question.
So I think we're going to leave it on that note. Please give a big hand for Elizabeth Churchill.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. So what happened with the 3 unicorns?